Okay, hello everyone, and we are back with Inclusion Starts Now podcast. I said I wasn't going to do an intro, and now here we are because I don't know how else to start a conversation. Today we have Christina here, and before I talk, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, tell us about your job, and where you do that said job.
Okay, so I'm Christina, and I am a special education parapro in Michigan, and I have been doing that just for a year.
I've never heard para-pro.
Really?
Is that what it's paraprofessional?
Yeah, I feel like most
Oh my gosh.
people here say parapro, para or parapro.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I do. I think it was a little bit of a, like, even when I was a para, I did feel like when people said paraprofessional, I was like, oh my gosh, you're a para. Like,
Yeah,
like I
yeah.
was a little too judgmental with like how long the word was, like professional. I don't know.
Oh, really?
I don't know. For some reason, whenever people said paraprofessional, it was like the ick that I'm like,
Oh.
are you like trying to brag or something? And then it's like that's not a good thing for me to think. Like I don't, because
Yeah,
paras do so much work.
yeah.
But for some reason, when I was a para, I would just say para. But I like para pro because that's like,
Uh-huh.
that makes it fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's just what I always said.
But so you've only been doing it for a year.
Yeah, I've only been doing it for a year, but I feel like I have to give background information on that because I was a gen ed teacher for 10 years and I have a disabled child. So it's like I didn't just randomly look for a job. I'm like, oh, I'll be a special ed para. Like I wanted to be in a support position and I came with a lot of background information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. So is
Yeah.
your child like at the school that you're at, or are they
No, no,
like,
different school district. Yeah, different district.
that's so cool. Are you gonna try to like go back and become a special ed teacher?
Yeah, that's my long-term goal is to get a special ed endorsement. I'm not sure in what area yet. Yeah, that's an unanswered question right now, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that's so cool. I seriously
Yeah.
feel like everyone who wants to be a teacher should be a para first.
Yeah.
Like you learn so
Yeah,
much
you learn so much.
being the para.
So much.
Yeah.
So much.
I mean, I really even go as far as saying like everybody in the world needs to be like either a para or like working in some sort of service industry.
Yep, I agree.
Because
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
see more perspective and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does your child work with paras in their classroom?
Yes. Yeah.
And do you love them or
What did you say?
like what's your relationship been like with them?
Um, well, where he is at, the um the school that he's in approaches paras a lot differently than the school that I was in. And they don't have like a dedicated para for a student. So he works with multiple paras, whereas I was a dedicated para for two students.
Oh,
And so there have been some really good para fits for him and some really bad ones. So
yeah.
that's been hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting how
It's like
like
the personality and like the ability to just be compassionate and have a lot of empathy with tricky behaviors can like make it or break it.
yeah, and like finding those people's strengths because I know like when I went into teaching, I remember them kind of saying that paras was like it was like a bunch of older women who basically
hmm
went into being a para because their kids went to school and it
Yeah.
was like all they could do. And
hmm
then they just were paras for like
hmm
20, 30 years. And that was
hmm
kind of my experience as a para. I was working with a
hmm
lot of older women.
Me too.
And then as a special ed teacher, it was a lot of older women until my
hmm
last year teaching. But
Yeah.
it was pretty interesting that it was like um, I mean, like some of them were like close to retiring,
Yeah.
and
Most
they
of
were,
the paras that work in my son's school are like older, like grandmas.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think it's very true. I think that schools are like looking for a certain person to be a para, but they're not willing to give the support and the compensation for like what they're looking for. So it ends up being I think a certain group of people that can apply and can be a para because of the time they have available, and it's just not what schools need.
Yeah. So did you get training being a para?
No,
Like there was
no,
no mandatory training for your school?
nothing beyond like what the district mandated as far as, and you're gonna you're gonna edit this, so I feel like I can just I'm not gonna give details, but nothing beyond what the district mandated for like everybody as far as like safety and health stuff that everybody else has to do.
Yeah.
Um I did receive one specific training based on a medical need of one of my students that was, specific to that student.
Yeah.
But other than that, as far as like behaviors, and again, like remember, I come with a lot of IEP, special education law, general education. Like I come with a lot of that knowledge already, but I still asked for training on several different things and never got it.
Yeah. Does that ever annoy the teachers that you're like kind of a parent, that you're like coming in there and being like, I don't
It
think you should do this because that would be annoying
it
to them.
an- Here's the thing, it really annoyed the special education team, but not the general education teacher. She was very helpful for like, she was very thankful for the questions that I had that I would bring up. And, but I could, I was like pretty much told I'm not part of the team halfway through the year from the special education,
Yeah.
like providers, that I needed to just be quiet.
So you did not go to the meetings for your two students?
They invited me. Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
I was gonna say that when I was
Yeah.
a 1-8, so I would well, they invited me and then I would just be there
Mhm.
for like,
Yeah, and I was surprised because none of my son's paras are ever at his IEPs, and I've even asked for them to be.
yeah.
They just do it different.
I know. Well, it seems so tricky because it's like, you have to pay paras if the
Yeah.
IEP is like after school
Hmm.
and if it's during school, you have to get a substitute and then how
Yep.
hard is
And then
finding
how
a
do you get a
para
substitute
substitute?
for the special ed, the gen ed, and the para?
Yeah, like I can see why it's like so hard to like have all these IEP meetings and trying to
Yeah.
have the para there, but
Yeah.
I felt like as a para, I had the most information about that child during the school day.
Absolutely.
Like,
100%.
yeah,
Like
like you're
the
going to all
amount of
the
you
therapy.
see their whole day and you see how it unfolds and you see how their temperament is in all of these different environments and how like one thing in the morning you can't anticipate how it's going to build up by the end of the day. It's
Yeah,
like crazy how I don't I don't think they know how much their parents know about their students.
it really what I mean, that was probably the best thing I learned being a para and then being a
Yeah.
teacher. And I was
Yeah.
like, no, especially those people who are like connected to certain students. I'm like,
Yeah.
you guys are the ones with them during like recess and lunch. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm filling out all the paperwork, but like
Yeah.
you guys do know them at a more personal level,
Yeah.
um, because you're just there all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything that you would change like at your school district or your whole area? Like what would you want to change for like para training? I
Yeah.
mean, we all want paras to have a bigger salary. That's,
Yeah, I know.
you know,
I guess I just think based on my experience this last year, to be honest, it really burned me and I had a very negative experience. There was no support. There was absolutely no support for two students who needed very specific individual high needs. And there should have been so much more support for them. Um, there's no support, training, and collaboration. I mean, I would have like the OT and the PT would come to me and tell me what needed to be done, but like there was never a team conversation about what that thing looked like or when it would happen or if I'm not there, who's doing it? How do we share this information with a substitute who might walk in? Or are the parents okay with Chris, with me like doing this with their student, because some of the things would be like just more specific to mobility or
yeah.
personal care needs and things like that. And like as a parent, if I ever found out that like some of the things that I was doing weren't discussed with me first before they were being done, I'd be livid,
Yeah.
for my own son. So, yeah.
So do you have any way of like a communication binder or like any time during the day or week to even like talk to teachers or parents about the students that you're working with?
No,
Man.
I had no common. My lunch was, you mean for the students I supported, right? Not for my
Yeah.
own child. My lunch was after my students came in from recess. So I didn't have like common lunch with anybody I worked with. I didn't have any like planning time. I did advocate for a once a week planning period with the gen ed teacher and a VI consultant because one of the students was visually impaired. And that was the only thing that I got.
Oh my gosh. With you, like you would go with the general ed teacher and the TVI?
Hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing. I was so glad that we got that, but like none of that was in place. And like the special education teacher was never a part of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so I totally agree. And I remember being the para and just being so upset with like, I remember thinking how often teachers are on the computer. I was
Hmm.
like, why are you always on the computer? Like, can you
Yeah.
not do that at a different time?
Yeah.
And then I became the special ed teacher, and I was just
Yeah.
like, this paperwork is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
the constant data tracking and then putting
Hmm.
it in and the IEPs and like the progress reports and
Yep.
then like trying to come up with work because a lot of times with special ed classrooms it's like this curriculum that is
Hmm.
so bad. I've really
Yeah.
only had like one curriculum that I really liked and it
Yeah.
still was like just for language arts, like
Yeah.
not even like we did not have enough stuff throughout the day. Like, being the special ed teacher, I remember thinking it's like that. So, my coworkers are supposed to be all my teachers, like all the
Hmm.
other teachers, but the adults that I see the most are the pairs in the classroom.
Hmm.
But I'm also supposed to be like technically leading the classroom. So
Yeah.
it's like, and when I first started teaching, I was younger than all the paras in the classroom.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. Like this
Yeah.
awkward hierarchy of like,
Yeah. You're
teachers
telling somebody older than you what to do.
yeah. And then they've been doing it for years. They're like, I've
Yeah.
been there for 20 years. Why are you telling me to switch this? And you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Thought it'd be crazy. Like, sorry. But finding a way to communicate is so hard, especially when the kids leave, they all leave. Like, when
Yeah.
do you find
Yeah.
time to talk to each other?
Yeah. I would
Like,
send a lot of emails, like not a lot of emails. I would just like as soon as I got home and had a chance, I would try to like, especially if there were tricky behaviors that needed to be documented per behavior plan and things like that, I would just send an email out to the teachers and the team. And that was it.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's smart. It's smart to like how smart it is to have things like written down, like the
Yeah.
recording of like, this is what happened. I did my
Hmm.
part kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
What do you wish that teachers knew about paralife?
Uh,
You're a
I
pro.
yeah, I wish they knew how stressful it is. Like the amount of stress that went through this year was more than I was really prepared for. And I think too, like I wish they knew and would, and this is just this is my experience. I'm not saying this happens everywhere. I wish they knew that the students pairs are supporting are their students first. Like I would always tell the specials teachers like gym and art and music and even the gen ed teacher, I said in one way or the other, like they're your student first. Like I want them, they need to hear the direction from you. They need to hear the correction from you. They need to be able to share stories with you. They need to build a relationship with you. I should be like the afterthought.
Yeah. That
And yeah.
I absolutely love that. Because so they're called interveners in the
Hmm.
deafblind field and they're kind of like what a one-on-one para would be, but
Yeah.
their motto is do with, not for. And it's
Yeah.
all about how, like, you never talk to the intervener to talk to the student. Maybe if
Yeah.
it's like your first time having a conversation and you need,
Hmm.
that's cool. But
Hmm.
that, like, yeah, if there's a question or you need to talk, like, you need to, even if the intervener is the one interpreting, like,
Hmm.
looking at the student and giving them that respect of, like,
Yeah.
I'm the teacher, you're my student.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is
Absolutely,
so,
100%. I'd even have like this was one thing that really bothered me just because of like how hands off a lot of the staff was I worked with disabled students where it was like they're yours, not mine. That was very much the mentality in the school I was in. And the really terrible thing is that the students pick up on it.
oh, totally. They
And I
totally,
would have very young students come up to me and ask me questions. What's his name? Why is he doing that? And I don't know. Let's ask him.
yeah,
And so like it's was so hard for me that like how easily young kids picked up on that from what the
yeah.
adults were doing.
That, oh,
And
I
I
could
feel like I'm gonna like cry
talk.
because it bothers me so much, like that it's starting that young.
Yeah, no, it's totally
Yeah.
something. And I mean, this is what I say so much. I mean, on my account and stuff, is that if you want to lead this inclusive life and have these
Yeah.
children who, like, are trying to live an inclusive world, like,
Yeah.
you need to lead by example. Like, you need
Yeah.
to show them how you talk to a disabled person. Like,
Yeah.
if if someone is using a wheelchair and, like, the button to open the door isn't working, like,
Hmm.
you could go over and be like, "Oh, hey, do you need help with this?" Like,
Yeah.
yeah, here you go. And then not sit there and be like, "You're such an inspiration to be in a wheelchair."
Yeah.
Like, and then, like, now, like, when we go to playgrounds and stuff, like, if there's a kid who, like, might be stimming or
Hmm.
might be non-speaking because, like, maybe one of my kids will try to talk to them and they, like, don't respond
Hmm.
verbally. And then, the second they turn to me to be like, what's happening? And you could just be like, well, I don't know. Do they look happy or sad? Like, do you think they
Yeah.
want to play? Like, maybe you should try to play what they're doing and,
Yeah.
like, trying to, like, be that example.
Yeah.
But I think it's also a lot of people don't know how to even be the example. They're
Yeah.
like, I mean, I remember in college having someone tell me that they were scared of disabled people. And I'm like, that really sucks that
Hmm.
you just, like, this whole population has just been segregated.
Hmm.
And so now when they're starting to, like, finally be included in their community as they should
Hmm.
be,
Hmm.
like, you're afraid of them. Like, that was like such a mind-blowing, because I was like a very educated person that told me that, and I was just
Hmm.
like, what? Like,
Wow. Yeah.
like, you're probably going to have a disability someday, right?
Yeah.
Like, kind of all fall into that category
Yeah.
at some point. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty wild. Uh,
Yeah.
so are you going to go back and be a para again?
I don't know. I'd like to get back into the classroom. I'm trying to find a district that will work with me on getting an endorsement while I'm possibly teaching. So I'll either end up in a para position again. I really don't want to return to the district I was in just because I'm not sure I can mentally and emotionally do another year of what I experienced, which makes me really sad for the students. Like I wish I could just pull them with me. So I'll either para for another year or I'll be in a teaching position. That's my hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I did the emergency teaching credential too.
Yeah.
Special education teachers are, like, in such a need.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there could be, like, two to three things that the teachers would change that you'd be like, okay, I'd come back, what would it be?
Mm.
I know this is a totally random
Yeah.
question, so I did not give you any time to prepare.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one is I would want to see more collaboration, like dedicated planning time between the gen ed and the special ed teachers, because I was often just and I get it, like that has to come from admin. Like they have to dedicate the schedule so that it works like that. But there has got to be common planning time. Like the paras cannot be the communicators between all of the service providers and the gen ed and special ed teachers. So dedicated collaboration. there would have to be some type of, I don't know, training about attitudes and mindsets
Yeah.
towards behaviors and just disability awareness. I think that those would be my two big things.
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely coming from the side of advocating for your own child and
Yeah,
fully immersed into, I mean, that whole realm of
yeah,
the struggles of having to like fight against people and like
yeah,
just keep advocating. So
yeah,
you definitely are coming in, I feel like already ready to like, I don't want to
yeah,
say fight, but you're like just
yeah.
advocate.
It was definitely hard to like remind myself I'm not their mom. And what was hard too is the two students I worked with like had very non-involved parents. And
Yeah.
so it's so you felt like somebody had to say something. I couldn't not say something because it's like their very early grade year and it's like a foundation year. And so you want them to get what they have every right to so that they can continue to access their education to the fullest extent possible.
Oh yeah. That, I mean, again, I'm sure we can talk about this
Yeah,
for a little more
probably.
because yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I remember being the teacher and just being like, please come to the meeting. Like, please come to
Yeah,
the meeting and we'll talk about it. And like,
yeah,
just do this at home. This is the only thing you have to do, and it'll be so
yeah,
great.
yeah,
Um, it's hard to get people involved who just like,
yeah.
I don't know, they're like already burnt out. And I mean, who can
Mhm.
blame them? Like you're fighting an ableist system, like of
Yeah.
the medical field, of like the education system, like you are constantly having to call and fight things and pay for
Hmm.
things. Like
Hmm.
it's it is a lot.
That's a
So
lot.
you are really like hitting all the marks of I remember actually once as a special ed teacher, I was like, maybe I'll go back to school and become a general ed teacher so I can make my classroom be the inclusion.
Yeah.
All the inclusive things will happen here. Is there anything else that you want people who are listening to know about paras or to like take from this podcast to bring back to their schools and communicate better with paras?
Yeah, I think I like from all of the different para support that I worked with and heard from, like they want to be able to communicate more with parents.
Yeah.
And I know that, I don't know all of like the league, rules and legalities around that, but
Changes between districts.
yeah, yeah, but it's like I wished so badly like I could have had more of a rapport, a relationship with the parents because I mean, you're caring for their kids like all day long in lots of different ways. It's not just academic. Like I just wanted their parent to know like it's okay, like we're going to try again tomorrow. We still did this today or we still did
Yeah.
that today or we laughed or because sometimes as like a parent when you get news like that you're like you think the whole day was terrible and it's not. So I think that I wish that parents had more or I wish that parents and paras could have a chance to like interact more and get to know each other more because the paras are just gosh the paras are they are like the backbones.
Yeah.
They really are the backbones I feel like of the support in the classroom for disabled students receiving special education supports.
Definitely. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Well, thank you so much. Any student that has you as a para and eventually as a teacher are so lucky to have like such a strong
yeah,
advocate
yeah.
already there
Thank
for them.
you. Yeah, thank you. It was really nice to talk to you.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for coming. And now I am ready for you to introduce yourself.
I've been in Germany for this time 2 years now, and since March of this year, I've been working. It's not necessarily as a paraprofessional, but more along the lines of a special needs aide. It's basically like school assistance, kind of like the title of it. And basically, my job right now is working with special needs kids. I'm currently kind of working as a floater. But most of the kids I work with have some form of autism or some form of pretty serious ADD or ADHD. Things I
Yeah.
don't know the exact term in English anymore because now they like I feel like psychology changes the terms or the diagnosis terms like every 2 years, and now I don't know the actual updates on it, but
Okay, well, so I actually had a question about the
Mhm.
language. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm hearing myself on your computer. Okay, maybe that just went away. Well, one of the questions I was going to ask you was about language, was in Germany, do they say special needs classrooms? Like, is that what it's called in Germany?
No, the kids at the elementary school I'm at now, they are special needs kids in a normal classroom. They're anywhere from so their system runs a little different. Like an elementary school is first through fourth grade in this state that I'm in. I don't know if I really want to tell you exactly which state, but
That's okay. You don't have to.
and it depends. Some states in Germany it's first or fifth grade, but then typically their middle school and high school is combined, and they typically have like three different tracks, and their schools are usually separated. So like there's one track if you're basically going to go to college, and another track where if you're more along the lines of like an office worker or or like any kind of like how do you say it, like handyman type stuff or mechanics. And then there's also special needs schools, and then there's also like a lower level of it. I'm not too familiar with like the different factors. I've only worked in the ones where with kids that are on high school track. I also worked as like a substitute teaching, a substitute. So, having that one. It's actually at a pretty famous international school in Germany. They have like a dual track system. One is for IB, so everyone knows the IB system is kind of like AP, and then they also have the German system. So it's like one school, but they kind of try and combine. Like they have basically a group of kids in one system, and then a group of kids in another system.
So if you're like on one track, how hard is it to switch over to a different track? I don't know, like
You
halfway
mean as a
through.
teacher or like in different kinds of schools?
I mean, I guess like wherever all the track, like, so if you think like
Mhm.
you're in the AP section or you're like in the college track, but then you're like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go into like being an electrician or something. Like, how hard
Yeah,
is it?
usually, if they're in it's called gymnasium. If they're usually in that track, it's not usually voluntary that they go to a different school. It's called Realschule. It's like the second level lower. It's usually like a grades issue, but that's typically not very common nowadays. But it's usually not like voluntary, and it's usually kids that the teachers can tell they're more advanced in academics than pretty much anyone else. They might recommend them, say if they're in like the secondary one or like
The teachers decide if like, or they
the
like just
teachers
make the
and parents
recommendation?
decide together. Because I know I've met people that like their parents wanted them to be in like the secondary level of it because once they in this so like the two lower levels, so Hauptschule and Realschule, they after they when they get to 10th grade, they don't complete till 12th grade. They do like an apprenticeship, like a 2 or 3 year apprenticeship for a job. It could be anything from like again a mechanic, an office worker, or I mean some of the apprenticeships are kind of BS, but but essentially what it is, it allows somebody who has that kind of a job. They basically they're never gonna not have a job because they've had that apprenticeship. They unless they do something pretty serious, they're always going to be able to find a job in that field once they do like once they complete their apprenticeship. That's kind of where what it's meant for. But on the gymnasium or college level, that's not really guaranteed. Once they finish that, they're usually either going to they finish 12th grade and they usually either go to university or they do like an apprenticeship that's really technical, like mechatronics or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so much different than the U.S. It's like you can't really compare it.
Oh, it's totally different. Well, so
Yeah.
I guess my next question is, how often do people with disabilities get to go into these other tracks?
Um, I mean, it really depends on the level of disability. I'm gonna try and keep it vague, but one of the kids that I'm responsible for, he's like I said, middle school-ish age, and he's in the higher level one, so on university track. And it really depends on grades. Like his issue, how let me think how specific I can be. It's more of like a temperament and behavior issue as opposed to an academic issue.
So what do they think about inclusion? Like, do they try to work on that at all in any of the?
Depends on the school and the teachers. kind of anecdotal. Some teachers are. I'm trying not to go on too much of a rant here, but like there's kind of a negative thing that's like I think is worse in the U.S. is a lot of teachers here. I feel like once they get their master's in teaching done, they kind of have the attitude of, okay, I know everything there is to know. And again, it's very typical German. It's like, well, we've had it this long, we can't change anything. Or it's like, no, we can't risk changing anything. That's anyone who's ever lived in Germany will tell you that's like a huge problem. Is like people will always more so in the US, like they're afraid of changing like a system that's been in place for I don't know what 200 years or something like that to a more modern system. I can go on a rant about that for hours, but because one of the schools I know of, they aren't necessarily too keen on like a kid having like an assistant with them most of the time, and that's kind of been a big issue just in general. Is like the the management doesn't always want inclusion. And the other school I worked at before I moved into being kind of sort of a special needs aid, sorry, English, where I was a substitute teacher, there was like no inclusion at all. Like you had kids who it was kind of, I mean, one kid, I mean, it wasn't open, but I mean, once you've seen a few autistic kids, you can kind of tell if someone has is somewhere on the spectrum. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So,
And yeah,
so do they call your position a special needs aide?
Schulbegleiter, so or Inklusionsbegleiter, so like inclusion assistant, or different. Whoever you work for, they're gonna call it something different, but it's basically the same job.
Yeah.
So if
'Cause I,
you like Begleiter, so like I guess you could say like school accompanier, or like you accompany them to school, basically. Like you're kind of with them most of the time.
yeah. Think in America too, a lot of general education teachers don't get a lot of practice working or a lot of training working with kids with disabilities, and they usually get like one class about disabilities, and it's
Yeah.
like a very intro class, and they're like, okay, there you go.
And
When
then
I
once
feel
you're
like,
actually in the classroom with them, it's like that class isn't always that helpful.
yeah, and I feel like actually learning how to support kids with disabilities is so beneficial for like being a teacher for all students. Like even students without disabilities could totally benefit from like the practices that I learned in my program.
Yeah, like stuff like, if a kid has autism is like changing the color, like printing out like the same worksheet on different color paper and stuff like that for them. Just basic stuff. Like sometimes it's kind of like teachers are a little bit reluctant for that, but I mean, that's kind of what that kid needs.
Yeah. Um, so do you want to be a teacher someday? Are you planning on staying in Germany and like going down the
Yeah,
teach?
I'm planning on staying here. The thing is, I only have a bachelor's degree and I don't have an education degree, so I could work as a substitute teacher, and I did for a while. But the work is like with special needs and special and more as in particular as a special needs aide. I like it better because I don't take anything home. Like I work my 40 hours, I'm out usually. Kind of a general thing that's way better here is teachers they don't have as much standardized testing as they do in the US. Because I mean, I know that's a huge issue. Even then, the grades don't really matter till about fourth grade, and then that's kind of when they really actually start grading seriously. So teachers have a lot more leeway from first through third grade, whereas in the US, I feel like it's a okay, we need to do the standardized test so school can get more funding. You know what I mean? That's not really an issue here, which I think is pretty awesome. That
Here because it's like how can we best teach the student, but also figure out where they are, like what they are learning academically. But yeah, there's been a lot of problems coming up with the test that they're like there could be like a lot of questions that are kind of skewed to people who are like upper middle class because they'll have questions
yeah,
about where like if you are growing up in a poor area, you might have never like
yeah,
I remember there
exactly.
was like questions about boats or something, and it was like, yeah, if you grew up in a poor area, you've probably never seen a boat or learned like any, and it might be really
Yeah.
generic boat terminology, but that's like, a random benefit for people who just grew up in more money. How do you feel like teachers treat you as an assistant in the or as a para?
Oh, wow. You got to ask a controversial question. Most of the teachers that I work with directly, it's usually an awesome relationship. Even if I'm not always happy with how they, not necessarily how they treat the kid that I'm working with, but in a sense, we always kind of get along. We're all kind of on the same team. In case you've got someone who's an admin who's way too young, that is a red flag, I feel like. I'm sorry, what was the question? That kind of just got put into a tangent.
Um, I really don't even remember, but I think I was just asking about the school. I don't know because I started thinking about how every school's culture is so different and how
Yeah.
like admin can make such a big change in like
Oh
how
yeah.
to support students.
Culture. Thing is in Germany is people and just like and again, I'm not necessarily neurodivergent, but I've got as a kid I had pretty severe ADD. That's kind of where I can work a little easier with some of the kids. I've still got a little bit as an adult. Well, I had like I know they don't differentiate it anymore, but I had ADD, not ADHD, because I wasn't necessarily hyperactive. I just have trouble maintaining attention, and I forget stuff all the time, even as an adult. Um, I would say 95% of them is pretty good. In Germany, especially people that are a little bit more like upper class, a lot of times are very, very distant. It's like, especially from northern Germany, that's a big cultural difference from the US. It's like I don't necessarily know why, but one of the stereotypes of Germans is a lot of them have like a stick up their ass, basically. And yeah, there are some teachers that I've met that like they are just incredibly distant and very, very 100% serious all the time. And that's been like for me, just in general in Germany, but especially working in schools, that's been a big thing. It makes it hard to read them sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but that at the school I'm at now, it's not necessarily a problem.
But I feel like the biggest shift I've seen in American education is that people are really trying to focus on like child-led and how can we teach to the child instead of being like, this is how we're going to learn, this is how you have to do it. It's kind
Yeah,
of like, okay, everyone's like talking right now. Let's all get into groups and do group work, like and like kind of going off of their lead, um, which is it seems like kind of a cultural barrier again in Germany. But I think
yeah,
this is a really big cultural shift. I mean, like people there
yeah.
Germany
It's
is a totally different country. Beautiful
Yeah, and you got
country.
to think too. Like a lot of this stuff has been like a tradition for like 200 or 300 years. So it's like getting someone to change it is. I will say in elementary school that like a lot of things are student led. Not necessarily on how they learn or what they're supposed to learn. Is not necessarily student led, but like kids are like allowed to decide things like where they want to sit that day. Like they're allowed to have some say in like a seating chart and stuff like that. And I think it's good. But it's mainly in elementary school for some reason, but in like middle and high school, that's not really a thing anymore. Um, and I think my experience, it's a good thing and a bad thing because some of the classes I'm in, it's especially if you have a kid that you're like an assistant for, and say if you've got another kid that's distracting them, and if they're allowed to choose their seat and they're still allowed to have those seats, it's kind of a gray area where it's like you're also, as an assistant or as a special needs aide, you're also kind of responsible for that kid having a good learning environment so they can actually get their work done. And that's kind of where it's been for me. I'm a little iffy on it actually, because especially with kids that are like, say, second, third, fourth grade, they're not always able to, I don't think they're always able to make their best decision on where they're best able to learn, especially if they're trying to sit with friends. That's kind of been my like only real downside to it. I think kids should get a lot of say, but like I think sometimes it does go too far with that, especially if it's like disrupts like the learning environment a lot. Because some of the kids I work with, once you get them to work, it's like it's awesome and it's awesome feeling.
I mean, it's just a lot of different kinds of teaching strategies and it's definitely a lot of work. I mean, I think that again, that's why I think general ed teachers would totally benefit from a lot of the courses I took about like supporting students with
Mhm.
disabilities because it really it really just goes over like their cognitive development and like I mean just like you saying putting things on a different piece of paper or making font bigger or like making there be less words on a paper or even like blocking it like having a piece of paper there's a bunch of
Yeah,
writing and then like blocking some of it like such simple strategies that just like I don't always feel like get taught unless you're knowing you're going to be working with kids with disabilities, where like again, those strategies could work for everyone. And I really appreciate you taking the time. It was hard trying to figure out our time difference, but
no, you're good.